Hey guys, before we get started today, I just wanted to take a second and thank what is basically my main and only source of information, and without which this series literally wouldn't exist. RemyWiki is a huge Bemani rhythm game wiki containing information about currently active and dead Bemani rhythm games. It doesn't have as detailed information for non-Bemani rhythm games, but it does have a wealth of information for Bemani games, and I reference it very frequently. Without it, as well as some random other sources of information like the occasional Wikipedia article and TV tropes for some reason, this series literally would not exist. So huge shout out to RemyWiki, and thanks a ton for all the hard work over there you guys do. Anyways, on to the video. Rhythm games have almost always gone hand in hand with fads or gimmicks. Whether it's the silly plastic controllers shaped like instruments, games based on weird concepts or set in absurd settings, or the actual rhythm games themselves being fads. The concepts go together well, and sometimes we see weird gimmicky rhythm games made to capture trends or follow up on other aspects of pop culture. That brings us to today's game, ParaParaParadise. Released on September 21st, 2000, ParaParaParadise was created to capture the ParaPara dance trend of the early 2000s. If you've never heard of ParaPara, like I hadn't, it's a dance trend heavily based around Eurobeat. Similar to line dancing, songs have specified ParaPara routines and involve a lot of arm movement. This was a very popular trend in Japan in the early 2000s, so Konami decided to make a game that captured the dance trend to try and capitalize on the potential market, and thus, ParaParaParadise was born. The ParaParaParadise machine is quite exotic, having a large platform with 5 hand sensors set up to detect hand motions. From there, the rhythm gameplay is pretty standard, with single notes and hold notes coming from the bottom of the screen to the top, allowing you to swipe your hands through the air between the sensors to hit the notes. This results in fluid arm movements designed to mimic ParaPara routines. The music of ParaPara is basically all Eurobeat, as Eurobeat is heavily tied to ParaPara dancing. It also has 2 different types of charts, those being ParaPara charts, which were designed to mimic real ParaPara routines, and freestyle charts, which were a bit harder and designed to be less accurate. Basically regular rhythm game type charts for the music instead of dance routine accurate ones. It was also apparently the first Bemani game ever with holds. I was having a bit of a tough time fact-checking that, but that would be pretty interesting if so. There's a mixed history of ParaPara's versions, so let's take a look through some of the features that the different versions introduced. ParaPara First Mix is a bit tricky to discuss feature-wise. Aside from the fact that the game is quite old and not a lot of footage of the game exists, First Mix was also updated a few times and got some UI changes. Everything I mentioned before basically came in First Mix, and then some changes were made from there. Early on in the game's life, about a month after release, First Mix v1.1 was released, and as far as I can tell, the only thing they did was remove a mode called Enjoy Mode. There's very little info on this mode, but I believe it was the tutorial mode where you couldn't fail. Interesting that they would remove that. If anyone knows about Enjoy Mode, please leave a comment down below, that would be much appreciated. After v1.1, First Mix Plus was later released. Even though it's still classified as First Mix, they did add a ton of songs, and they did make some other pretty major changes. The UI of the game was reworked, all the title cards were simplified to be uniform, 8 songs were given the another difficulty, and there was a mix of other difficulty revisions and new charts. This mix also got a CS release on PS2. That's right, they somehow actually put together a home version of the game that required hand sensors in the form of a controller you spread out on the floor and wave your hands over. This actually worked pretty well by the sound of it, and the rest of the game was basically just a straight port of the arcade version, so while there's not much else to say here, I'd say it sounds like this was a decently competent home port for a game with such a weird control scheme. After that came Second Mix, which was the final version already, released March 15th, 2001. That's around 6 months for this game to basically go straight out of production. It's something to be expected for a game that was chasing a trend so hard, but for a game with such a large and exotic machine, it's really weird to see it die so quickly. But you could probably also argue that that contributed to its death, so who knows. Actually, on that subject, the hardware needed for this version of ParaPara was only ever used for this game, and was known as the Viper hardware. The game's OST was never released after the game came out, unlike First Mix, and the Expert and Another difficulty names were removed, all being consolidated into hard for the returning songs. It also uses CG background dancers a la DDR rather than the videos of ParaPara dancing seen in the original game. Other than that though, that was it. A 6-month run with 2 arcade versions and a console release before the game went straight in the dumpster. Pretty crazy to see how fast a game can go in and out when it's based on a fad. One final quick footnote is that the Korean version of the game actually has an exclusive cabinet design. That means including all the different hardware for the JP release and the Korean version, that was 3 cabinet revisions for a game that was in production for 6 months. With that, ParaParaParadise slipped out of the spotlight. Out of all the games we've covered so far, I'd argue that ParaParaParadise might be one of the easiest games to deduce the reason for its death. For starters, it was based on a fad. This basically guaranteed the game a short life unless ParaPara dancing was somehow making it to the mainstream, which it did not. Apparently, even when the game was out during the fad, it was never very popular and didn't perform well. That plus expensive cabinet hardware and most likely expensive licensing costs for the Eurobeat music, this almost in a way seems like a complete failure on the business front for Konami, even if the game was decently playable and fun. What might surprise you is that ParaParaParadise has actually become a cult classic rhythm game for its uniqueness and essence of the time it was created. There's a few ways that ParaParaParadise is being preserved. Believe it or not, Stepmania actually has support for the ParaPara controller as well as charts for it. There were never too many, but it was a way for people with the PS2 controller to play some charts at home and sort of persevere over time. More recently, there's a dedicated clone of ParaPara called Parastar that is based in the Stepmania engine and is being made to replicate more of the original ParaParaParadise experience. That's in active development again after recently being revived. Those developing MAME are also working on adding support for ParaParaParadise to the emulator, having spent time working on emulating the hardware that the first version of ParaPara runs on. There's been a surprising amount of the rhythm game community rallying around ParaPara to preserve it in interesting ways, even more so than some other games that were more popular at the time that they died. While ParaPara was an interesting experiment from Konami to see if they could capitalize on a dance trend, I think they kind of learned the hard way that they really can't do that effectively without spending a bunch of money on cabinets and games that in the end are just going to get scrapped. Even though the rhythm game community has been rallying around ParaParaParadise in recent years, it joins our list of dead rhythm games. Thanks for watching. Check out my Twitter and my Twitch, links are in the description below. Feel free to join my Discord if you want to chat about the videos or say hi. You can also check out my Patreon if you want to support my content. If you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.